Hey everyone, I'm Nathan from mastersofmusic.com. For this video, I got the Boss ME-90. I'm going to walk you through all the features, how it works, the different things it can do. There's a few sound examples along the way and a demo song at the end of this video, the last minute and a half. But I want to talk about the hardware first. We've got the input, your outputs. You got the switch for guitar amp and line. So the line is speaker modeling enabled. If you want to connect it to a guitar amp, you switch it to guitar amp. It's also got a headphone jack, effects loop, and you've got this adapter so you can connect Bluetooth devices to it to use the app. It's got a USB-C port to connect to a computer, DC in, power button right there. On the back of the device, it's got this surprise, you can actually run it off batteries. It comes with some AA batteries. That doesn't come with the power cable, which is kind of weird, but does come with batteries. All right, so here's a look at the front of the unit. So you've got a bunch of different options for the preamps, which are different amp models, and then you've got a bunch of different effects, of course, as well. Different options for that. You got different overdrive pedals, and you've got different delays and modulation effects. So one thing I didn't notice at first, there's also a bunch of different additional effects and amps that aren't shown on here that are only accessible with the software. I'll show that a bit later. It's got the pedal as well. You can use for wah, you can use for delay time, and it's also got some different pitch effects. Then you've got 8 foot switches down here. Each of them has 2 different functions depending on which mode you're in. And you've also got some press and hold functions as well. I'll show some of that here in a bit. So overall, the build quality feels pretty solid. It is plastic, but it does feel pretty solid, especially considering it only costs $350. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the main features now, how you operate the device. So it has memory mode and manual mode, which you can switch to by hitting that button. And so when you're in memory mode, like right now, you can turn on different pedals as if you're using a pedal board. And then you've got the different lights that show up for the different types of effects. There's a bunch of different effects for each one of these. And then you've got the EQ. I like using the second effects as an EQ. It just seems to make the amps clearer when you're using the built-in amp modeling, but it's got a bunch of different effects as well. It can be used as delay and boost. And like I said, each of these has more effects in the software I'll show a bit later. You've got 3 different reverb types. I didn't notice this at first because it's just one dial, but there's 3 different reverb effects on that dial. You can activate that, deactivate that with this button. It also functions as a control you can use for different things. So when we're in memory mode, that cycles through the presets. You can use the bank buttons to cycle through your presets, and then these buttons to select the presets. So there are 9 factory banks with 4 presets per bank and 9 user banks with 4 presets per bank. So you have 36 slots that you can overwrite in the user section. Cycle them through here using your banks, and then you can select which preset you want to select after you select the bank. So you can also have it automatically switch when selecting banks. There's some different settings in the master settings list I'll talk about a bit later. But yeah, so that's basically how you navigate the device. You can use the built-in amp modeling if you want, or you can just use it as an effects pedal, like connected to an amp if you want. The only thing with this dual setup is it can get kind of confusing on what your settings are. So when you switch from memory to manual mode, it'll carry over what those settings are in manual mode or memory mode. So then your dials, they don't match up to what they actually are. So when you're in memory mode, you can hold down the edit button to see what the actual parameters of each of these dials are. It'll show those arrows, and you can line up your knob to, you know, be what is actually the value of that setting. So there's some different settings for that in the menu. You can have it default to whatever the knobs are set at when you switched to manual mode, or you can have it, you know, that doesn't change until you turn the knob. So that's one thing that can be a bit confusing. You press and hold that button, it'll open up the tuner. Has an indicator for flat and sharp, and it'll show the green arrows when it's in tune. It's also got some other features. You got like the looper. It's got a 38-second looper. You can overdub with that. So let's talk about the preamp section a bit here. So we've got quite a few amp models, and they're all tied in with their own speaker modeling and everything like that. You can also load in your own IRs to use with them. I'll show here in a bit. But one thing I wanted to talk about first is you have different amp models not shown on the front of the device. So you've got this software that you can install from the Boss website to manage your presets and to manage the settings using your computer. They've also got an app if you wanted to use Bluetooth. But what I was getting at here, I wanted to show is in the amp section, you do have some additional amps that aren't shown on the front panel. So the last value, the Recta stack, you can have that swapped out for these other amps as well. So there's like a deluxe combo, which has got a nice clean sound. So you do have some additional amps and additional effects not shown on here. They're only accessible via that software. And then once you set up on the software, you can save them and access them on the device. So first, I didn't really think the amp sounded very good because like the factory presets, I don't really like them. They don't sound that great. But when you start from scratch, just turn everything off and get an amp and start messing with the dials, you can actually get some pretty good usable tones out of this thing. Mostly have to use your ears. You got very few settings, like there's no presence or anything. You just got bass, middle, and treble to adjust your amp sound. So you got to get used to just using your ears. And like with the Recta stack, I have to turn bass all the way down, which isn't something you would normally do. But with the EQ, you can get some usable high gain tones. So there's a demo song I recorded at the end of this using that setting. So another thing you can do here is if you hold the edit button, you can switch between IRs. You can load user IRs on here. It supports 3 of them. And then the number 1 setting there will go back to the factory setup, the factory IR. So you can load your own IRs on here to customize the tone a little bit. For this demo, I'm using exclusively the built-in sounds, however. So another thing here with the effects, like I wanted to show, some of them have press and hold settings, and then they all have these different usable, selectable, different options that aren't available on the front panel, like I was saying. So you've got your signal chain laid out in here on the app, and you can see how everything works here. Some of these different parameters will change the layout. Like, so the comp right here, it's normally at the beginning if you're using it as a compressor, but if you select something else, it'll move it somewhere else in the chain. Some of these other different selectable options will put it at a different location. So here's the different settings that aren't available on the front panel. So they're only accessible through the software or the app, but once you save them to your preset, then they'll be on that selectable, the last selection on the knob. So that's always like a selectable parameter throughout all of these different effects here. So you've got the different options for that. So the OD pedal under the selectable section with that last category. So you've got like 7 different pedals to choose from in the selectable option. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There's more stuff than just the front panel allows. And then you can also have your effects loop before or after the preamp. There's a setting for that. By default, it's going to be before the preamp. And then for the pedal effects, you don't have the selectable option for the the actual pedal. But for the other effects, you do. For the mod section, you've got some different. They like the stereo chorus is a pretty cool one on here. Then you've got the effects 2 slot, which can be used for a whole bunch of different things. You've got delay, chorus, it's got a pitch shift effect. But I like using it as an EQ if I'm using the preamp because it kind of cleans up the preamp, makes it sound clearer, even at just the default settings. But yeah, you got a bunch of different options for that. And then there's also the dedicated delay section here with a bunch of different delay effects. And again, you have some different settings here for the selectable option as well. So yeah, you've got a bunch of different effects on this unit, but there are limited parameters. So mostly, they're limited to 3 knobs with each of these effects. So you don't have as many settings as you're going to get on a more advanced type of device. But again, $350, it's hard to complain too much about that. So when in memory mode, if you hit the edit button, you can cycle through all the global settings. There's a whole bunch of different settings here, but with the limited screen real estate, you can't really tell what these really mean unless you're using the manual. So all the stuff's at the end of the manual. You can configure the device how you want, how the knobs react, and how the pedals work. So there's a whole bunch of different settings. All right, if you didn't want to use the built-in preamps, you can also connect it to a real amp. Your input from your guitar goes obviously into the input of the ME-90. Then you go out the send, not the one on the left, the one on the right. You go out the send, and then you go connect that directly to your amp. Then you go out the back of your amp send unit, and then you take the send into the ME-90's return, so the white cable on the left here. And then you take the main out, the left out, from the ME-90, and you take that back into the return of the amp. And that's basically how the 4 cable method works, so that you can use the drives and the delays and all that stuff with your amp. Another thing I like to do, I like to use it with the Tonex pedal, and then you just hook that directly up into the loop, because the Tonex pedal, it kind of has better amp sounds than the ME-90's built-in sounds. So yeah, you just go into the input with the send, and then out the output into the return of the ME-90, and that works really well for using other pedals. It can use any kind of pedal. Like if you wanted to use delay pedals, you could switch the loop to the other side of the preamp and stuff like that. By default, it's before the preamp, and then you can just disable the preamps on here when you're using memory mode and use it with a device like the Tonex, which has the amps and pedals built into that, and just use it for effects. So number of different use case scenarios. So we've got the pedal as well. Like I said, you can use it for wah, of course. It's got some other features that can be used for like pitch shift settings. And then it can be used to like increase the delay time if you have a delay going, or you can increase the mod rate. So there's some different settings for the pedal as well. In regular mode, by default, it's just a volume pedal without being active. So that's a quick look at all the main features on the ME-90, what you can expect, how different ways you can use it. So I recorded a quick demo song using the ME-90, only the built-in sounds. I got the rhythm dual tracked. I'll show the settings while the song's playing. And then I've also got a rhythm or a lead that's double tracked as well, because it's super basic, but it sounded bigger that way. So here's the settings, here's the song.